My name's Tom Rivington. I'm the president of a company called F6 Networks, and we're currently building in the initial phase of a 300-kilometer fiber optic build from Fredericton through St. John, connecting into Moncton. Well, aside from that build, what I want to talk about today, and what Josh alluded to, is something greater, and what we're calling the New Brunswick Peering and Internet Exchange. I want to put this in some context. A lot of people, I don't think, really understand the pioneering aspect of New Brunswick in broadband and internet technologies. UNB had the first computer science faculty in North America. NBNet, most people attribute NBNet to NBTel. NBNet was actually a coordinated effort amongst the province of New Brunswick, the University of New Brunswick, and NBTel at the time. And it was really UNB that spearheaded the growth of NBNet, and eventually it was taken over by NBTel in, I believe, 1993, I think it was. And this year, the ECN is celebrating its 40th anniversary, and the ECN is the New Brunswick Education Network. With that, there's some economic development issues in New Brunswick. Everybody knows the north has been hit by industrial decline. We have mills closing constantly. We have coal-fired generating stations up in that area that employ many people. Those are destined to be shut down. The province the provincial government has put a new focus on ICT as a way for the province to overcome some of those obstacles. And we have some success stories in New Brunswick. Everybody likes to talk about Radian 6 and Q1 Labs over the last little while, but there's been others. And for example, in St. John, there's a tremendous amount of software companies that are doing great things, and in Moncton. New Brunswick has its strengths. We are strategically located. You come from Europe, you've got to go through New Brunswick to get to the U.S. Northeast. You've got to go to New Brunswick to get to Central Canada. We have new open access networks. F6 Networks is building their own new network. The main fiber company has an open access network. In Nova Scotia, there's the Valley Community Fiber Network. And in Quebec, there is multiple open access networks. And we have access to green technology. We have dams in this province. Myself, I only thought we only had one or two, but there's many dams in this province. That's green energy. We have new wind energy stations opening up. And we have the possibility of tidal energy and solar. So this is the telecom landscape in New Brunswick as it is today. The red line indicates the telecom backbone. That is where all global traffic travels through this province. It's along the CN rail tracks, and there are 4 or 5 carriers in Canada that own fiber on that, and it's not open access. It's a closed. Bell owns whatever's not being used. It enters Edmonton, it exits Moncton. It does not pass through any other large commercial center. The province is dominated by Bell Alliant and Rogers. They've both been on tremendous build programs over the last 4 or 5 years to deliver triple play services. Other carriers, however, like TELUS, Allstream, and Eastlink, they have no regional fiber whatsoever. They are stuck in Edmonton or they're stuck in Moncton. They don't extend out. And they have very scarce local loop. We do have some open access municipal networks in the province. There's a small one in Edmonton, which a lot of people don't know about. And then Fredericton is famous for its network. It's been around probably, it must be 6-7 years now at least, and it's growing. All this is encompassed by the fact that the province is hindered by 750,000 people. If you went to Windsor, Ontario, an area much smaller than New Brunswick, you'll get 750,000 people in a very small area. So what is a PIX? So PIX, the people call it different things. In telecommunications, they call them meet-me points or carrier hotels, just where communication companies exchange data. And it's either done for a fee, peered, or there's transfer fees. And it's normally a single point or single points across the city. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. If you want to build an economic development model out of ICT infrastructure, it's no good putting that point in Moncton or St. John or Fredericton. Because if you put it in Fredericton, that doesn't do anything for St. John, Moncton, or the rest of the province. So what you have to do is you have to create a meet-me point that encompasses the whole province. This is just to illustrate the kind of things that Josh was talking about, the marginalization of this part of Atlantica. This is the level 3 map is right off their website. As you can see, it bypasses the state of Maine and the province of Nova Scotia completely. And this is the Hibernia map. I showed you the telecom backbone. They follow that telecom backbone through Moncton, Evanston, on the way to Montreal. Again, no diversification off that line. And state of Maine is ignored completely. So our vision is an ICT superstructure for the province of New Brunswick. It'll be the hub for the US Northeast, Central Canada, and Europe. It will be the place where companies want to come, British Telecom, Verizon. If you want to get to Central Canada, you come to New Brunswick. It'll be open access, interconnected, diverse route in and out of the province. It'll bring competitive telecom services to areas of the province that currently don't have any competitive telecom. Right now, when the F6 network is completed in about 4 or 5 weeks, there'll be the opportunity for any carrier to have access into the Fredericton market. Right now, no other carrier outside Bell, Line, or Rogers can get access into the Fredericton market without leasing a service. And it'll be a magnet for global investment. Once you have a wide area open access network that spans the whole province, a company like Google can buy fiber from the US Northeast all the way into Bathurst, let's say, and put a data center in Bathurst with redundant path in and out of Bathurst to Central Canada, the US Northeast, and Europe. There's bricks and mortar related to this too. We have to have regional data centers, and you can use these as centers of ICT excellence. So where the optics have to be regenerated, those can be the locations for data centers, which can be the locations for education and training programs for ICT. And what we want to do is create the NB cloud. So you're not going to be connecting to Fredericton. You're not going to be connecting to St. John. You're going to be connecting to New Brunswick. So the north doesn't get left behind. The south doesn't get ignored. The west doesn't get ignored. The east doesn't get ignored. Everybody's connected and redundant. And the government plays a role in this. Currently, F6 networks, it's all privately funded. To build to this extent is going to require some public-private partnerships. In the past, the province and the federal government has a tendency to provide funding for carriers to build private networks. And private networks only benefit the single company that obtains the money. It doesn't do anybody else any good. In the past, there's been wireless adventures of the same sort. So building open access networks and supporting open access networks allows a wealth of players to come. They also play a role in utilizing it. Simply the various levels of government purchasing the fiber and using it to rationalize their own services would be a great role for the government to play. And then finally, attracting investment. I was part of a program 2 weeks ago in Boston where the government was promoting ICT business in that area. And it was a tremendous opportunity for us to go down there and introduce ourselves and what our plans are. And the government was a big part a huge part of setting up those meetings and getting that face time with those potential customers. And all this involves a lot of optical collaboration. In Quebec, there's Canary and RISC. In Nova Scotia, there's the Valley Community Fiber Network. And of course, in Maine and New Brunswick, there's the Maine Fiber Company and F6 Networks, which are the two anchors. But it really takes, the organization, the optical collaboration of these four areas. And then what we have at the end is this New Brunswick Peering and Internet Exchange, where you have, previously you had just that dark black line going through. That is the existing telecom corridor. All those other lines are what's being built, what has been built over the last 2 years and will be built probably over the next 6 to 18 months. And that will give New Brunswick a fully diverse, open access network with the availability of putting data centers in green area with using green technologies in economically depressed areas. There's no reason why international company like Google or IBM or Cisco cannot put a data center in Bathurst or Miramichi or Campbellton under this model. They have a full, open access, diverse, reliable, secure, low latency network. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Do we have some questions in the audience this morning? Well, again, I find this stuff so fascinating. One of the things that occurs to me, it reminds me a little bit of when I read about the Transcontinental Canadian Railroad. It's like the last spike, only you're putting one of those spikes here in New Brunswick. So it's almost an historic time. One of the things that occurs to me when I think about cloud computing are the rules around data storage. And sometimes those rules involve US data has to stay in US, Canadian data has to stay in Canada. I work for the government. We're not allowed to store our data in a US-based service. I'm not allowed to use Google Clouds or anything like that to store my email, for instance. Can you say a little bit about the opportunities that arise because of these kinds of jurisdictional issues?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but what I can say is that there is a difference between your data flowing over an open public network and your data flowing over your own private network. And so there may be regulations that on the surface appear to cover both, but if the data is staying on your own private network, I'm not quite sure how that is affected by those privacy laws.
Okay, but it does open some opportunities.
Yeah.
If I want to provide services that rely on data which must be stored in US, but to provide those services globally or into Canada,
yeah.
It's okay for the services to provide at a global level, but the storage has to be in US so that we can, say, put a data center on the US side and by the same token, a data center on the Canadian side to store Canadian private data that must be stored in our jurisdiction, but the services can be provided elsewhere. So F6 network could provide that kind of flexibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about some more questions? All right. Could you say just a little bit more about the connection into Canary? And maybe one of the questions that I would have is access to, let's say, different wavelengths. So can I get into the wavelength division multiplexing part of Canary as well?
On a dark fiber network, it's up to the customer to put their optics on it. So if you wanted to use DWDM, you could use DWDM, or you don't have to. Now, DWDM equipment, if it's only for your own use, I don't know why someone would go to the expense of putting that wave multiplexing equipment on there. It's a lot cheaper just to put regular optics on and light it up. In Quebec, I'm not as familiar with the extent of the open access networks. There's more open access closer to Montreal than there is farther up the St. Lawrence. But there is a willingness on the part of RISC to maybe develop their networks further to interconnect with us. Additionally, we've talked to financial companies in Boston, and they're looking for low latency connectivity to Europe. And milliseconds means millions of dollars to these people. So this map, is apt to change because really the shortest distance between two lines is a straight line. Between 2 points is a straight line. And so where you see Calais and St. Stephen and there's no connectivity to St. John, it very well may be that a financial institution says, we want that connectivity because it'll shave 3 milliseconds off our time. So we would build that with the proposed Bay of Fundy crossing, and that would give a very fast, low latency connection to Halifax, which then puts them on the undersea cable to Europe. And so if we can save a company 3 or 5 milliseconds over what they currently have, that's a significant savings in terms of those high-frequency traders and financial institutions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Thomas, for a fascinating talk.